July 21st. I cracked open my eyes early this morning when the sunlight crept over the cliff to the east. I sat up and stretched, yawned, and walked over between two big boulders to pee. Even though it was the middle of summer and I had a sweatshirt on, it was still pretty cold. I held my arms in close to my body and blew warm air into both of my fists. When I came back, I looked down at the huge black mound of human body that is Rondell, laying there, all curled up like a baby. Surprise, surprise, I thought, still asleep. I looked up, spotted Mong down the beach in the water up to his ankles, staring out over the horizon. I kneeled next to Rondell and rolled his big head to the side a little so I could get my book of mice and men out of his bag. Jude was so comatose he didn't even change his breathing. I read the last couple pages on my stomach, facing the water. The ending was pretty damn sad, but I like how short the book was. And I liked the characters. Made me think of me, Mong, and Rondell, and how we're kind of living off the land too. And Rondell was sort of like that dude Lenny, except he never killed an animal just by petting it. At least not that I know of. When I closed the book, I glanced over at Rondell for a sec, going back over what I read in his file last night. He didn't seem like a kid who had all that bad stuff happen to him. He just looked normal, except the fact that he's so damn big and not that smart. I looked down at the beach at Mong, though, just standing there in the water, staring out at the ocean in one of his trances. And I could actually see it. Mong was touched by all that shit he'd been through. I moved Rondell's head again, stuck the book back in his bag, and pulled out the next one in my stack, The Catcher in the Rye. I know pretty much every damn body in the damn world's read Catcher in the Rye at some point, but not me. I think it was assigned in my English class last year, but I never got around to it. I read the first 20-something pages, and right off I knew why it was so popular. It was the way the kid Holden talked about stuff, and how he seemed honest about everything that he was going through, and he said, "The only thing I wonder about sometimes, though, is why some rich kids like him complain about their lives so much. I know everybody's situation is hard in its own way, but when you look at a kid like Mong and Rondell, when you read their files and think about how they never even say a word about it, they just deal. And then you start reading about some prep school kid like Holden and how the whole time he keeps complaining and complaining. I don't know. I just think about that sometimes. I'm not saying the book's not good so far. I like it a lot. I just wonder how this Holden kid will be if some real bad shit went down. Like he was born to a crackhead mom or his dad shot him in the face. By the way, reading on the beach early in the morning like this, with birds chirping and flying all over the ocean looking for fish, a little bit of the beach dampness covering everything in sight, including you, it's probably one of the coolest things you could do with a book. Trust me. The reason I didn't read so much back in Stockton is because I figured I was too busy living my own life. Why would I read about different characters' lives all the time when I had a damn life of my own? Me and Diego cruising the hood, fishing off the levee, playing ball at the park, looking in people's windows and watching them sleep. But now I know it doesn't matter. You maybe even get more from a book if you have a life of your own because you can relate. Anyways, I read until Mom came back from the water and Rondell woke up, and we gathered up all the stuff we were going to take with us, some of the food and the matches and the leftover beers and cokes, and shoved it all in Rondell's bag. We didn't say much as we took off walking, just that we were going to go along the highway to see if we could hitch a ride to Santa Cruz, where Mong said there'd be a major bus station. He also said we had to watch out for cop cars in case they were looking for who tied up and robbed that old store dude last night. The place was miles back from where we were, but cops can spread word about what happens in different places mad quick through their system. And I don't know why, but I didn't care as much about following Mong anymore. Maybe it's because it didn't matter who was leading anymore. Or because it was only temporary until we got to Mexico. Or because of what I read in his file. But I hardly even thought about it now. We walked along the narrow side of the road, single file, holding out our thumbs, watching for cops. Twice in the first 2 hours, we had to duck off the side of the road when we saw black and white moving toward us in the distance. But they never saw a thing, and we just watched them roll by. The problem was, for the longest, no regular car slowed for us either. It was 3 hours into walking before a stock-looking black car finally pulled to the shoulder in front of us and slowed to a stop. I was happy as hell, too, because the whole pedestrian thing was mad played out, but then Mong sort of hesitated. "Shit," he said. "What?" I said. "What?" Rondell said. "I think it's a cop," Mong said. My stomach dropped. Sure enough, right after Mong said it, a big Mexican cop wearing sunglasses got out and leaned against the trunk, waiting for us to get up to him. I looked at Mong to see if we should run, but he motioned with his head for us to keep going. "Gentlemen," the cop said. "Hey," we said back. He pushed off his trunk and crossed his arms. "You know it's not real safe to hitch a ride these days, right?" We all nodded and looked at the pavement. "Where are you headed?" Mong smiled and looked up, said, "We're going to go ride the roller coaster in Santa Cruz." "That right?" the cop said, nodding his head, staring at each of us one at a time. Then he didn't say anything for a second, and neither did we. He reached in the window of his car and pulled out his folder. Started looking through some papers in there, peeking at us every couple of seconds. The guy was rocking a pair of those shiny cop sunglasses, and on both of the little lenses I could see me, Mong, and Rondell standing right there in front of him. A Chinese kid with damn bullet holes in his cheeks, a skinny cholo-looking kid, and a giant black kid with a baby fro. Add that to the fact that we all had the same exact stock sneaks, same jeans, same black sweatshirts, same bags slung over the same shoulder. I was surprised dude hadn't already thrown our asses in the back of his undercover cop car. "Gonna spend the day in Santa Cruz, eh?" the cop said, closing the folder again. "Sounds like a blast." "We're excited," Monk said. "Okay, let me get your names real quick, and hopefully I can send you on your way." "How come you need our names?" I said, maybe a little too fast. He smiled and put his folder on the roof of his car, pulled a little notebook and pen from his shirt pocket. "Just standard procedure, gentlemen." He pointed at me to go first. I looked at Mong and Rondell real quick, then turned back to the cop and said, "Marco Sanchez." I watched the cop scribble it down. He pointed at Mong. "Yao Chang," Mong said. The cop scribbled down the name Mong said, too, and then pointed at Rondell. "Rondell Law," Rondell said. He pointed at the cop's pad of paper and said, "Got 2 L's at the end of the first part. Rondell." He looked at me all proud of himself as the cop scribbled down his name. Me and Mong both looked at Rondell with our mouths hanging wide open. "You guys just sit tight for a minute," the cop said, and then he went around to his door, reached in for the radio, and held it up to his mouth. He looked back at us all skeptical, then picked up his folder and started rifling through his papers again. Mong tapped me on the forearm, motioned with his head toward the beach. I nodded, turned to Rondell and whispered, "Good one, homie." "What?" he said. As soon as the guy turned his back to us again, Mong broke for the beach. I grabbed Rondell's arm, pulled his big ass with me, and we all hit the sand, racing south toward Santa Cruz, our bags still slung over our shoulders and bouncing with every step. The cop spun around, yelled out, "Hey!" and sprinted around his squad car. He chased us down the beach for a ways, but when he saw he wasn't going to catch us on foot, he spun around and ran back towards his car. Mong slowed and turned to us out of breath. When he stopped, me and Rondell stopped too. Mong coughed and spit and said, "We gotta go back the other way." He was having trouble catching his breath. "To where the cop is?" I said. "He's going to call on his radio." He spit and bent over for a sec, looked up. "They'll have cops looking for us, all down the beach." "Shit, that's true." Me and Rondell leaned over too, trying to get our wind. "We gotta go back," Monk said, standing straight up and spitting. "We gotta go past where he is and wait, maybe till nighttime." I nodded, then I turned to Rondell and punched him in the arm as hard as I could. He frowned, grabbed his arm, and said, "Ouch, Mexico." "What the hell were you thinking?" "What you mean?" he said, rubbing the spot where I hit him. "You gave him your real name, Einstein." "He told me to say it." Rondell stared back at me, baffled, then turned to Mong. It was amazing. The guy genuinely had no idea what he'd done wrong. "It wouldn't have mattered," Mong said. "He was looking for our description. I was wrong to use the road in the first place." "Still," I said, frustrated as hell. "He told me to say it," Rondell said, shrugging. I looked down at my sweatshirt and jeans and told Mong, "Yo, we need different clothes." Mong nodded. "Tomorrow." He started creeping back the other way along the cliff, and me and Rondell followed him. We snuck around to the small cliff and stood between the ocean and the highway where the car was, peeked around at the cop. He was sitting in his front seat with the door wide open, radio up to his mouth. He lowered it into his lap, listened, and raised it and said something else. Then he just sat there for a couple minutes. Cars occasionally sped by on the highway. A backpacking couple on mountain bikes pedaled past. It was much warmer now because the sun was up higher over the mountains, but behind us, over the ocean, were evil-looking black clouds that seemed headed our way, made me think it might rain soon. I looked at the road just as 2 normal-looking cop cars pulled up next to the guy and cut their engines. 3 cops got out, slammed closed their doors. They huddled next to the Mexican cop, talking. One had a cup of coffee in his hand. Then 3 of the 4 started climbing back down to the beach again. Me, Mong, and Rondell scurried into a big cluster of boulders out of sight. They walked by, carrying their walkie-talkies, sunglasses now up on the Mexican one's head. He looked around and talked to one of the other cops, then into his walkie-talkie. Another cop, a female one, turned to face the water. She kicked at a shell and looked up at the dark clouds over the ocean. I was nervous watching them, but at the same time there was no way they could see us, and they were more talking on their radios than actually looking. They probably figured we were still booking it down the beach, a long ways down there by now. Rondell tapped me and whispered, "Hey, Mexico. I get it now. I shouldn't have told him my real name, right? That's why you said you was Marco." "Whatever," I whispered back. "It's over now." "I get it, though," he said. Turned to Mong and said, "I get it now, Mong." "It's okay," Mong said, patting Rondell on his shoulder. I thought how weird it was that Mong never got frustrated with Rondell like I did. He always was nice to the guy, which almost made Mong seem like a regular person. Rondell turned back to me, started whispering something else about this incredible discovery he'd just made about saying his real name. I put my finger to my lips so he'd stop making noise. He nodded his head and smiled, said, "Okay, Mexico, but I get it now." Looking at Rondell's face, you'd think he just found the cure for damn cancer. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine, Rondo," I said. "You just gotta think, man." "I know." He hung his head. "It doesn't matter," Monk said. "We'll be all right," I said, trying not to be so pissed. Rondell nodded and patted me on the shoulder. Me and him glanced at each other real quick. Then we looked back at the cops with Ma. They stood there a while longer, gazing up at the black clouds now coming over in the choppy ocean, pointing. One of them said something else into his walkie-talkie, and then they all hiked back through the sand and over the guardrail to their cars. The three of us snuck up to the cliff again, watched them climb into their driver's seats and take off down the highway, the lead car's lights spinning but making no sound.